Hey guys, Stealth here. We're going to do a quick deck review on Steel Division's Panzer Lehr deck. Now, you may have seen other armored decks, such as the ones that we already had in the beta. This is the 12th SS Panzer Division. You can see it has quite a few cards in the armor section, but it's not completely full. Then you have the other one with the King Tiger. This is the 21st Panzer Division. Again, pretty heavy firepower, but a bit more balanced of a deck. If you want absolute armor and nothing else, you take the Panzer Lehr. Now, all this armor that you can see here comes at a cost, and that is infantry, and especially staying power in Phase A. That is what this deck is really poor at. Anyway, let's have a look. For the Reconnaissance tab, I decided to go for some cheaper reconnaissance infantry in Phase A. Now, the AAGYKA are not exactly capable infantry troops as far as fighting recon. They're only there for passive reconnaissance. It's a two-man squad. They are very easy to wipe out. But fortunately, they split up into either the AAGYKA and their transport, the Kubel MG. The Kubel MG is very handy if you want to support your tanks with an additional machine gun. So make sure you don't just discard this unit, because it's still valuable. Other options are the Speetrup. These guys are more capable of dealing damage on their own, but they're still only a four-man squad. And considering that your transport is slightly more expensive, you're paying, or actually the Speetrup itself is slightly more expensive. You're paying 45 points. And while points in Phase A are not that much of a problem, they are definitely valuable in Phase A. You don't want to be spending too much on reconnaissance. For faster recon, I have the SPW234/1. This is a very mobile unit, comes with a 20mm machine gun and a 792mm gun, and is there to do some quick mobile scouting, whereas these guys are more passive scouts, or slowly moving up through the terrain. Then, as we're entering Phase B, I actually start to get tanks, because there are simply no tanks in Phase A whatsoever in this deck. None. So in Phase B, I want to have more mobile units, and the SPW233 would be a handy version there. Now you can see it is pretty much the same unit as this one, it's just that this is a closed-top vehicle, whereas this is an open-topped one. The gun is completely different, and I had this gun expressly loaded to make sure that this one can help out tanks with dealing with infantry. Because when there are tanks, there are usually more units of infantry nearby from the enemy side. And tanks are great at dealing with infantry. They have those machine guns, they have the main gun, but I want them to save the main gun and most of their attention for real threats, actual problems, armored units, transports, possibly artillery or AA if you can find it. I don't want them to spend too much attention on infantry, so that's why this gun is here. The 233 carries the 75mm gun, which does a nice impressive amount of damage against infantry. And, of course, besides that, is also fast and has good optics. And then for Phase C, we have the SPW234/2 Puma. This one is, I suppose you could call it a significant upgrade to the 234/1. The 2 comes with a 50mm gun and is much more diverse. It has the same armor layout, 2, 2, and 4, and its gun is way better at dealing with armored targets. So 10 points of armor piercing means that you can cut through a nice amount of armor without too much trouble. It is, however, far inferior in dealing with infantry, because it only has a 1, yes that's right, 1 HE power gun. This thing is there to kill off transports, instead of potentially get a side shot on an M4 as it's running away from your King Tiger. It's not so much there to deal with infantry. We have different units for that. So, especially important in Phase A, I only have the AAGYKA and the 234/1. Then, infantry. You have very little choice in infantry in Phase A. And so far as you do have choice, you have very low numbers. You have the Führer unit over here. This is the first one that I added. Then Panzer Grenadiers, but keep in mind there are only 2 cards, or 2 units in this card. You do get the transport, which comes with 2 792mm guns and can be very helpful in suppressing enemy infantry. But please do not take this deck into a town, because you're going to find yourself completely overpowered by the enemy infantry. They can just field so many more units in Phase A than you can. To make sure I can at least hold my infantry together, I have not just these two for frontline ops, but also the MG42 to do a bit more fire support. And this one too gets support from the 251/1. Now in Phase B, you can get a few units per card. You can get some Panzer Grenadiers, a couple of machine guns, or some more leaders. But I don't find that too interesting, because the cost is slightly too high, and I'm talking activation point cost, for the amount of units that I'm getting for them. And besides, in Phase B, I can start to use the units that I actually want to use in this deck, which is tanks. So I decided to skip right to Phase C, where I have Pioneers, Sturm Pioneers, and Pioneer Führers. I decided to go with a couple of Pioneers. These guys are mostly there to deal with tanks up close. And when I say up close, I mean 100 meters. That's the range that this anti-tank grenade is effective at. Sorry, it's not anti-tank grenade actually. This one is used against infantry. Very, very high explosive value, not so much effective against armored units. Sturm Pioneers are there to dispose of enemy infantry that might be holed up in the tree line. They're there to operate close to, or potentially even slightly behind my tank, to make sure that the tank can take a bit of fire off of them, and that these guys can burn out enemy infantry from a tree line, making sure that the tank does not take an anti-tank rocket to the side. Now, and here we are. The firepower that this deck provides is all here. The tank tab. Now you could argue that I have too many of them, and you would probably be right, but I like my flexibility. Starting in Phase B, you can bring in tanks. Phase A, there's simply nothing there. So in Phase B, I decided to bring in a Command Panzer. These Command Panzers are there to boost the veterancy of the other Panzer IVs. These are the Panzer IV-H, making sure that these guys get more accuracy and more staying power. And by staying power, I mean that these guys are more likely to be able to not panic, thanks to the leader role that the Befehlspanzer takes. Now their armor is not particularly good, it's only 8 points. Their gun is very nice at 14, and at 140 points they're pretty affordable. But take note that you can only, with an income of 95 points per turn, or per minute actually, get about a half tank of these. Say 90 or 70% of a tank is what you can afford. It will depend on how much terrain you've been able to capture. If you capture more terrain, then you might be able to get some additional income and get some additional points to be spending on these units. Now the Panzer IV-H, nothing really special. Rather accurate gun for a tank like this. 6 points. Rate of fire, nothing too stellar. And their HE is just dreadful. This is why I mentioned that I have the other units to make sure that they can deal with the infantry, where this one deals with the armored targets, because it has a 14 AP gun, meaning that it's enough to go through virtually all of the Shermans and do a lot of damage to them. Now, making sure that I have a slightly bigger gun and more staying power, I also have the Tiger. This is the standard Tiger 1. You have this one in 2 different variations in your deck. If I'm very, very rich, I'm going to bring in the Befehl Tiger. This one is capable of both doing a lot of damage and helping allies do more damage. Whereas this one, the Befehlspanzer IV-H, might be taken out slightly faster. So I decided to bring in this one in case I get overly rich and want to spend it on something. And then the Tiger E is basically your same Tiger, it's just that you get 2 of these per card, whereas this one only gives you 1. Now the Tiger E can also be brought in with, I believe, various different levels of... Or actually, no, never mind, different deck. You can only bring these in with 2 stars. Keep another command tank nearby, and these guys are going to be extremely accurate, as well as hard hitting. If you want some more mobility, you could go for the Panther D. These guys have a very high armor-piercing gun, and in, actually, I believe in virtually all respects, they're better than the Tigers. You're paying slightly more for them, You're paying 250 versus 240. Their gun is a 75mm gun versus the 88 on the Tiger E, but the 75mm gun on the Panther D does more damage. They have slightly more armor to the front, whereas the Tiger E is more rounded in the armor department. The Panther D is more vulnerable from sides and rear, and the Tiger E is more capable of staying alive when threats are shooting at it from the side. Now, that 9 side armor is nice, but it will not keep you safe from absolutely everything. So make sure that you keep this thing safe. Then, in Phase B, we also get the Königstiger. Also known as the Tiger II, this monster can do an immense amount of damage. Especially if you augment this one with a command tank nearby. They are just marvels to behold. They have 7 points of accuracy, and that is their standard unit card. Then I get 1 command star from the the King Tiger itself, and potentially another one from a command Tiger or command Panzer. Doesn't really matter. And that is when you have 2 stars and almost an accuracy of 80%, which in this game is just ridiculous. Now, I think that they still need to work on the commander a little bit, because he seems to be either retarded or very cramped there, and his arms are coming out of his neck, looking at it, so they may need to change that up a bit. Anyway, the Königstiger, very expensive. In Phase B, where your income is 95 points, you need to save up for almost 4 minutes out of your 10 minutes that you have in this phase if you want to bring in a Königstiger. The trade-off is that they are very difficult to get rid of for the enemy. Yes, there are guns that can penetrate 21 points of armor, but there aren't that many of them. So the real threat that this guy gets is airstrikes. And again, airstriking a Tiger or a Königstiger is definitely possible. You're going to scare it off for a bit, but it's going to come back, and it's going to keep coming back. The best way that I found to deal with these things is to have anti-tank infantry close to it, but that is not always a possibility. Now, once we've survived Phase B long enough, we can go to Phase C, where we can bring in the Panther A. Now, this is one of those ace units. This is Barkman. I don't believe that they give you actually any increase in stats. Nothing whatsoever. Because if I were to compare the Panther A Barkman to the Panther A, you can see that all the stats are exactly the same. I haven't seen any difference, and I think it is just a unit card difference to sort of bond with your units in a way. But this was one of those pre-order bonuses that you got. I don't believe that the game is pay to win whatsoever. So it's not like you got the aces with it and your tank is suddenly going to be more accurate or less likely to panic. I don't believe it works like that. Anyway, the Panther A, when compared to the Königstiger, is inferior. That is definitely easily recognizable. It has less armor, a less gun. It is slightly faster. That is definitely handy. But all of the stats are inferior. The thing is, they are nicely rounded. They're pretty accurate. They have a very punchy gun. And you can use these to back up your Königstiger, whether it's the one that you got in this phase or the one that you get in Phase C. Because in Phase C, you can also get 2 cards or 2 units of one veteran star Königstiger or one of 2 star. I brought this one in. I added a command unit and it got an immense amount of accuracy. Really high amount of kills. And the enemy was just capable of just airstriking it and trying to keep it at bay. It panicked, it fell back, and it came back. It was just not killed the entire game. Keep in mind, you need to survive long enough to get to Phase C. That's where this deck really starts to actually get some punch. Phase B is alright, but you're barely scraping by with income to get these units into the field. And in Phase C with 150 points, you're actually going to be able to afford some of these things. Now there are some other options. You also have the Befehl Panther, you have the Panther A, this is the same the one I have already in. The Panther D, I already have this one in. You can bring in more Panzer 4H if you're looking for some more cheap units. Overall, I found this to work rather well. Of course, you can adjust this as you see fit. If you're a massive fan of the Tiger E, then be sure to bring a couple of these in and adjust the deck. Moving on to support, because keep in mind that these tanks are very nice, but they can operate on themselves if you absolutely have to, but I would not recommend it. I have the SDK of Z 250/8. This one, again, there to deal with enemy infantry, because in Phase A I don't have a tank, and if the enemy's fielding a lot of infantry, I want to keep them at bay. That's what this thing does with a 22 round of ammunition 9HE gun. Range 1000 meters, you just park it somewhere, you have it suppress some enemy infantry and you drive off. Do not expose them to tanks. They are not very likely to survive for a long period of time. The 251/21 is an interesting one. It's armed with 3 15mm guns, carrying 3000 rounds of ammunition and doing 10 HE damage every single time that they hit. Very nice to suppress enemy infantry quickly, so that, for example, this one does not have to target moving infantry, but can target infantry as they're sitting out in the open and help murder them. Other units in Phase A, not that many. Phase B, I decided to bring in the Opel Blitz to keep my tanks resupplied. Now, I didn't actually have to do this in the time that I played this deck, because my tanks were just not running out of ammo. They just keep firing. Unlike, for example, Wargame Red Dragon, you don't have to do that much with your logistics. And that's a good thing, because these things cost you 50 points. Meaning that, yes, if you absolutely have to bring them in, they are not that expensive, but I would rather be spending that income on tanks. You can also bring in the SPW-232. This one's armed with a 20mm gun, again very handy against infantry units, also providing a command start to units nearby. But I already have units in the command section, or units which are commanders, which are more survivable. And of course, yes, a Befehl Tiger or Befehl Panzer is way more expensive than, for example, the 232, but I just prefer my command tanks, because I want to have a strong armored block of units. You can also bring in the Grille in Phase B. This one, again, very high punch against enemy infantry, but I decided to go with the Flampanzer 251/16 to make sure that at short range I can burn off enemy infantry. Because in Phase C, infantry could be the biggest threat to my Königstiger, and I want to make sure that they don't get close enough to actually use that bazooka. So that's what these guys are here for. A bit of side defense against my tanks, or for my tanks. Anti-tanks, you don't have a lot. You only have 4 slots, so use them wisely. I decided to go with a Pak 38 in Phase A, because Phase A for me is the most difficult phase. I want to survive with this deck, and if I have to just take up a defensive position and sit there for 10 minutes while I wait for my tanks to arrive, then I happily will do so. So I'm not going on the offensive in Phase A. Also, if the enemy is going on the offensive in Phase A, I want to be able to ambush them. That's what the Panzerschreck is here for. And then in Phase B, this is debatable, the Jagdpanzer IV. I have it as an augmentation to my tanks, but again, it's 190 points, so they're rather expensive. Come to think of it, you could just skip this one and invest the points that you take, or invest the activation points in some other area. For example, get yourself another unit of Panzer Grenadiers to make sure you survive Phase A. Anti-air is an important element, because if you do not keep these aircraft at bay, they are going to continuously stun lock your tanks, making them very, very easy to kill off with infantry later on. So for Phase A, I have the Flak 38 and the Gepard. These things are both here, not so much because they're in Phase A, but because they're cheap. And I want to have to not spend too much on AA and spend all those points on tanks. Potentially an ally, especially if you're playing together with a buddy, if he can provide you with more AA, then you can provide him with all the tanks that he will ever need. The Flak 36-37 is there in Phase B to dish out slightly more damage. And in phase C, where I want to have large-scale defenses, I have the Flak 4188. You only get one, so make it count. And keep in mind that this thing, if required, can also double up as an anti-tank gun, where it has 15 AP. Artillery can be a very, very important element in a tank deck to keep them safe. So the artillery that I have is carrying smoke launchers. I want to make sure that they carry both HE and smoke, not just artillery units that only ferry around HE. Because HE will help against enemy infantry, but it will not be able to lay a smoke screen where my unit can be hidden from. The 251/2 is basically your same type of vehicle. It just carries more rounds. It is also slightly more expensive, comes with a machine gun, and overall, in phase B, these things are handy. I decided to bring one in phase A, because in phase A I don't have that much infantry. So all the help that my infantry can provide, or can be given by the 250/7, I will happily take it. And judging by this picture, this guy too has his arms twisted in a very uncomfortable fashion as he's trying to handle that machine gun. So I think they need some work there. In phase C I have the Hummel. This one is a sheer HE damage dealer. Only there to just use that big gun, suppress enemy infantry, and make sure that my guys can keep moving. You have a pretty nice diversity in options here. You also have the Panzerwerfer, you have a observer, and you can bring in the Nebelwerfer. This one could be very handy to suppress enemy units of infantry. I tend to go with more smoke and keeping my guys able to just shield the tanks from airstrikes. And talking about airstrikes, your air force is going to be important. Just keep in mind that in a 10v10, doing consistent air patrols is going to be tricky, as there's a very good chance that there is at least one dedicated Air Force deck there that is capable of just wiping the floor with all of your aircraft. So in phase A I have the Me-109G6, mostly to deter enemy aircraft from coming too close, and second to strafe enemy infantry concentrations, making sure that they keep locked down and just buy myself some more time to make it to phase B. The Focke-Wulf 190G3 is in the same role. It's there to strafe, it's there to do bombing runs, and it's not there very much to deal with enemy aircraft. And then in phase B I have the Focke-Wulf 190A8. Two of them. You could go with one of them at 2 stars, but if this one gets shot down you have nothing, whereas just having one of them in the area could help. So that is the Panzer Lehr. I was able to play with this deck, do very well with it. Unfortunately my connection lagged out and I was forced to give up the game, so I was kicked out there. But I'll happily be doing some more gameplay of this deck soon, and when I do I'll be uploading that to the channel, of course. If you want to use this deck, make sure that you keep the consideration of survive phase A and push in phase B and C. Because if you try to push in phase A, you're going to find yourself running out of units very, very quickly. And of course, as per the usual, this is the way that I have the deck set up, which does not mean that this is the perfect way to set up the deck. Your mileage may and undoubtedly will vary, and adjust the deck to your own liking. If you think that I have too many tanks, take some of them off and dedicate those points to, for example, recon. You may want to have another artillery unit, maybe some more infantry. Do it as you like it. There's no right, there's no wrong. There's only what's effective for you. If you want to use it, the deck code is in the description down below. And other than that, I look forward to seeing your feedback on it down in the comments. Thank you for watching. Hope it was useful, and I'll see you soon for more.